signing the contract with the bank was the most difficult part of that project. I think the pension system is the most important one in my opinion, because like in the US, like you are in charge of your retirement, you know.
What do you think Europe still gets wrong about user experience in fintech? Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Curiosity Code podcast. As usual, I'm your host, Alex, and today I'm joined by Hanif Nezhad. He's a co-founder of Neco Solutions. It's a fintech software company building tools for neobanking, wealth management, and trading. And today we'll be exploring the big challenges of software development in fintech, from balancing innovation with regulations to building technology people can truly trust. And I'm truly excited about this particular episode because guess what? I'm in the same boat as Hanif. So I'm really looking forward to this conversation. Welcome to the show, Hanif.
I'm happy to be here.
All right, let's start to talk about software development. So you've worked across various aspects of fintech, wealth management, robo-advisory, trading, before you founded Neco Solutions. Can you walk me through your journey? What personal experiences or aha moments push you to build your own company in fintech?
So I think I was kind of lucky to get introduced to fintech early on in my career. I had like a couple of years of experience in e-commerce before that. I was living in Dubai back then. And then I happened to like go to Poland, surprisingly enough. And I met this company called Empirica, which was active with building fintech software solutions, mainly like specialized in trading, investments, robo-advisory, wealth management, and high frequency trading. I was like there early on, and then it was 2016. And since then, I've been in fintech. I haven't like even thought of like moving away to a different sector. I don't think like I had like an aha moment for setting up Neco Solutions. It was just a natural course of action for me. I was like mainly like working in project management and product management. So I think like pretty much everyone who's in that like seat fantasizes like building their own product and like, you know, having their own company, you know. So I think like I had the ambitions as well, like everyone else, like in that doing like product management, project management. That's how it started. So I had kind of like fantasized it a little bit, but then it just like happened that like I came to Portugal and I had like a couple of project offers like to take on, you know, and I spoke with my Polish partner and we decided to like set up Neco Solutions. We didn't want to be like a massive like software house that like, you know, takes as many projects as they could, you know. That wasn't the idea. Like initially we wanted to always be like a product company. So we did like a couple of projects in blockchain, in crypto, and we also had like two very exclusive products that we focused on. One was like an internal, and one was with our one of our partners. So these two products are rather like, you know, the main focus for us. One of them is like a very like stealth internal product that we're thinking like to launch, and we've been working on it, but it hasn't been like our main focus. It's around personal finance. And the second and the main product that we have been like putting almost 100% of our focus in the past like few years is called Options Robot. It's an automated position management platform for options trader in the US. And that product has been launched like for around a year. And it's a product that we care a lot for. To be honest, I'm very proud of this product as well. So to answer your question, like I don't think we had like an aha moment. It was just like everything happened to put us like in this journey.
So when you were in Poland, what kind of markets were you exposed to? Or it was you also work with global players in the financial services world?
Yeah, so like we had like a variety of clients that we were working with. For Warsaw Stock Exchange that we were building like high frequency market making platform, to banks that wanted to use like high frequency trading software solutions, working with banks, working with smaller fintechs that needed help development of their, you know, fintech logic, in the back end. We also like at Empirical built a robo-advisor solution. It was a white label robo-advisor solution, which was tailored to ING banners. I was like early on the product owner of that product, which I think is like one of the most important and like joyful journeys projects that I have like take on.
Nice. So you had quite a diverse exposure to different problems that exist in the market before you actually started building software for your clients.
Yeah, absolutely. Like there were a lot of challenges that we had to deal with, because we were a company of like maybe 30 some people. And if you think about it as a startup, it's kind of big, but if you think about it as a company that wants to serve banks, it's quite small, So we had a
Right.
lot of
Yeah.
challenges that we had to kind of like, deal with in terms of like placing ourselves like in the market. And when the early hypes, the first like wave from 2017 to 2019, that like the price of Bitcoin hit like, 67K, I think like that wave, also kind of like woke us up with that there's a huge market there. So we had like to also kind of like adjust like all of the projects that we had tailored for TradFi, like from, to like, working with API protocols for like banks or like stock markets, or brokers or custodians, everything could be adjusted to the crypto world as well, So that was also like a massive like wake up call for us, challenges that we had to deal with. When you're living those moments, you're like, I want this to be over and I want us to be like successful and I want us to like get this project and I want us to like, get this back, But when you look back at right now, it's like, okay, it was fun, like doing all those things. It was fun, like, staying in the office for like 15 hours, because the next day we have like a meeting with the bank, so you just want to make everything like as perfect as possible. So yeah, there were a lot of challenges in that time.
So your domain where you deliver products is a little bit different from where I operate. And I think that domain is heavily driven by regulations. And I'm interested to hear your perspective on how regulatory pressure and aspects like data sensitivity and user trust they actually reshape the way developers build and ship products in finance.
Regulatory is usually scary. Like if you come from tech background, if you're like coming from legal and, like law background, then it's a little bit like, okay, you understand like the concepts better. Considering we were coming from a technical background, for us, it was a bit of like a monster to face, and we had to face that monster like at the end of the day. So of course, like we had to like go down that like rabbit hole and understand every aspects of like the regulatory requirement that was required for our products. At the end of the day, I think like the transparency and stability of regulators, it's so important like for products that are compliance heavy, like in trading and investment world. I always hated European regulators because they just expected too much always. And the set of requirements that they would give you would kill innovation, It was like always like, I don't know, like MiFID II that we had to like comply with for like one of our, few of our trading products or investment products. It always had like a lot of questionnaires that you have to ask like the user. So it's a lot of time consuming for you as a vendor to build. And it's a lot of like, it's very time consuming for end users to go through it in order for your services to be compliant, right? It just kills like innovation, it just kills the whole onboarding journey. I always like hated like complying with European requirements, and I always loved the American ones because like it was always like very straightforward. It was quick, You kind of like assume a little bit that the person who's onboarding understands what they're doing, which I think like 9% of the people do. They understand the kind of risks they're getting involved with because at the end of the day, it's their funds that is going to be at risk, right? So it was always like easier to like comply with their requirements, but credit to EU with the MiCA or MiCA recent crypto regulatory requirements and guidelines. Things were a lot better because the US didn't have like a universal regulatory requirement for like crypto that time, and EU kind of released this like regulatory requirement for crypto activities, and we were like, okay, for one slide, you're kind of like to a first step. But now, like with the Genius Act in the US, also like they have a very clear like guideline, but there was this sort of like a year and a half, 2 years like gap between when EU released that requirements and then US coming up with their own requirements. And during that time, I know like a lot of companies like went down in the US because they couldn't kind of like operate like in a very healthy environment because they don't know what's coming, right? And if you're like a small company, if you're like challenged with what is going to be my regulatory requirements, and then if you're not super well funded, you'll drown. You'll drown, So I think like I'm not sure if like the regulators understand like how big of a role they play like for smaller fintech companies, but they do a massive they have like a massive role. I don't know if they would hear this. Just please like be transparent, like understand us, like don't expect too much. Like, once the requirements are like too long and too heavy to implement and for the end user to go through, it just kills innovation. It just kills like onboarding.
How do you personally navigate that? Do you have like a dedicated person on your team who is dealing exclusively with regulations, or you have external consultants, or I don't know, it's AI? How do you deal with that?
I think I like to understand it myself best, So I have to like go through like the complete requirements. And once you kind of like go through like the compliance procedure like a few times, then you kind of like get a better grasp of like what you need to do, because you get familiar with the clauses and what sort of requirements and what should be like the interpretation of like those clauses. So I like to understand it myself first. I just, kind of like, shut the door, print it on a paper, get my markers, just get at it, see like, what do we need to like what, because usually like these requirements are like, 100 pages, but then at the end of the day, you need to know like 5 pages, but you need to like identify what do I need to comply with, right? So I need to understand it first myself. But once you do that, you create like a set of requirements, you speak with a legal consultant that is, familiar with and have done like that set of requirements that you need to apply to your products. And then you have to kind of like, do the cross-checking, It usually helps if there's a sandbox. I think like the FCA in the UK has done a very good job of creating sandboxes for fintechs, especially in the trading and investment scene, that you go through like the compliance procedure, you implement what is required for you to implement, right? You put it on this like regulatory sandbox, and then they have a team of people that will go through the product and say, okay, if what you have done is good or not, and then they would give you like, so you don't actually go to the market, and then they would come and write you a fine, and that has happened in the US a lot. Like, some big firms got like some big checks, big fines for not being compliant, like, as what the SEC or FINRA required them to be, So I think like, that sandbox really does help, but again, like, it's been done many times. So there are like people who have done it as well, like the legal specialties that have done it as well. So yeah, so first do don't work, implement, and then have someone like review it for you.
What I'm curious about is that you're a co-founder, right? So there is another co-founder. So there are two of you, right? Or more?
Yes. There's two of us.
From your perspective, how having a co-founder helps to, navigate all the variety of challenges you're facing? Because, you just mentioned that, okay, I have to actually figure out the legislations and compliance side by myself, which, I'm just putting myself in your shoes. Like, man, you have to deal with so many things in business, and now also, you have to really be into the compliance things. Tell me more about how your co-founding relationship work out.
First of all, nobody tells you like this is going to be like the life you will have as a co-founder, when you're setting up a company. At the end of the day, like a Swiss Army knife, you have to do like multiple things and you need to be able to do multiple things. So that's just like the life for us. But the interesting thing about like my co-founder, who was like my friend for like many years before becoming a co-founder, he does operate like in different areas that, to be honest, like I'm very thankful that he does in those areas when it comes to like operational efficiency that we need to have in order to like move like the company forward. You know, it's not only like product, it's not only like compliance, and it's not only like, launching of the product. It's like operating the company that I think is the most important like element. And thankfully, like Tomasz does this very as well as like dealing with our, team, making sure that, they're good. I think I sometimes kind of like skip over those human elements of like running a company, and I think he does a
Yeah.
very good job of like knowing and understanding who's not happy, and why they're not happy, finding out why they're not happy. So I think it's a great cooperation, a great like fit. I'm really thankful for having him.
And you are more on the technical side, right? So you can focus on
Yes,
technology and regulations and how it fits together and how to build a product that actually complies.
exactly. Yes.
Let's talk about the actual cases that you guys worked on. So I see here in my notes that you helped design a white label robo-advisor that was acquired by ING.
Yes.
So I'd like to talk about that case. I'm curious about what are the hardest technical or design problems behind the scene, and what did that experience teach you about scaling financial products? Because if it's a white label product, it's definitely and then acquired, so it's definitely a question of scale in the game as well.
I think like, to be honest, like technically and design wise, like we had such a good team, and like it took us like maybe around 8 to 10 months to have like a product that was well ahead of like the competitors in the market. Of course, like, going through like the proper design process to understand who will be using that product and why they will be using it and what sort of like features do you have to like implement. Because when it comes to like white labeling like products, you get to meet like a lot of prospects, and they would have like different demands from the product. I want like the transaction history to be like shown this way and need to have that filter. But like another wealth management firm does not focus on that at all. They just want to have like, a different, I don't know, like portfolio, like logic, construction logic, right? It's very difficult to like give everybody everything they want, right? And you have to give the clients you're working with what they want, because otherwise, like, why would they like be buying your software? So for us, build this like scope of a product that would fit everybody, it was the challenge. So I think like the scope was like the main challenge of that product, not like the technical ability to build it, because we had like a team that was already like implementing like high frequency trading solution, right? Or when it comes to scalability, like we already had like, platforms that were like processing like, orders like in milliseconds, and many of those orders in milliseconds. So like having like that team, it wasn't like a problem like that we faced, but adjusting to clients, potential like prospects, demands and requirements was the main challenge, right? The process of, I think, signing the contract with the bank was the most difficult part of that project. So we had like what they wanted.
You mean signing the contract with who? With first customers or
No,
during the
with the
acquisition?
ING Bank, with the ING Bank.
Okay.
So
Yeah.
the product was what they wanted, and we made sure of that. And we had like a few iterations of like adjusting the product for it exactly. It was this process of actually like making sure that the product integrates with their internal systems, right? And you go through like the like a very like never lasting firm of like I don't know, like details about the security of the software, details about like the sort of tokens, the software use, the sort of like, I don't know, like stack that we have in the product, use,
Hmm.
kind of
Hmm.
libraries, using who's like in charge of who wrote this. Like it was just like 6 months of that, and when you're like, a startup like operating, that's that 6 months can be like very dangerous, right? It can be like a, like life or death sort of like situation, for you. So this I think like was the most challenging part of the product, that we had, of that project that we had, was to actually like making sure that the product integrates with the bank. So we knew it's kind like for us it would take like 2 weeks to integrate to the bank. No problem. We had like the technical knowledge, but it was like the bureaucracy of like, having the software introduced to a bank and having it like integrated and having the team that is going to be working on that, integration process. It was just like the back and forth of that was like, it was like very lacking a good word, like annoying, because you already
Yeah.
had like the product that they wanted, but then actually like, signing the deal was a little bit like
I think anyone who is building solutions for those large financial firms like banks, consultancies, and like big players in the market, they've gone through this
yeah,
hassle. I've
yeah.
been there myself, and I can totally relate to the pain that you felt. But I don't know. I don't know how to do it in a different way. Do you have any insights, like how you could have done it in a different way?
Uh, I mean, if you're like a small startup and you're just starting off, it's going to be difficult. You have to go through that process. Like how you have experienced it, I have experienced it. And as long as like you're like a small or medium like player in the market, if you're like planning to work with banks or bigger financial institutions, that's going to be the challenge. That's going to be one of the challenges, right? That you have to be patient for. But once you establish like a relationship with one, the first one is going to be the most difficult one, right? Once you establish like a relationship with like a big financial institution or a bank, then that would make it a lot easier for other banks and other financial institutions to choose you, right? Nobody wants to be the first, right? But once you like seal that first, I think like it just becomes like much easier. So I think my advice is like power through, have great resilience, just go through with it. Once you have that first one, think about it like that. Once you have the first one, the second one is going to be much easier. It's never going to be like as painful as the first one.
Did you have any certifications back then before you started the process, like ISO 271 or SOC 2 or something similar to that?
Yeah, yeah. So we had those, but the most important ones that they require was like the compliance of the software, with
So
the
their
EU.
internal actual
Yeah,
compliance review
yeah,
process. Yeah.
yeah, yeah,
Okay. When I ask the question, I wish there is like a silver bullet, like, hey, you can actually do it like that, and then you won't have to go through it. But it
yeah,
seems like it's not. It's just something that you have to plan for, right? So when you
yeah,
start a fintech startup that serves that kind of profile of clients, that's probably should be part of the plan. Like, hey, you
yeah,
will suffer it through like for at least 6 months till you close the deal
exactly.
if you do everything
Yeah,
right, if the product is
yeah.
there.
Yeah, we have this like motto and that like our company say like plan for the worst, hope for the best, you know.
Hmm. Hmm.
So we always like plan for the worst, because we have kind of like gone through that like those like stages like many times already. So expect that, if you're like doing like a time simulation of like, selling a deal or selling a software or something, just expect like the worst timeline or like the worst offer. So it's always like best to like prepare for those scenarios. And then if something good happens, then okay, take it.
I'm curious how you approached ING initially. Like any advice, like how to even get in touch with such big profiles.
I think like they were interested already. So they kind of like we came to their radar than the
Oh,
other way
okay.
around. So they were kind of like it was like actually like this was like a long time ago, so it's like
Hmm.
2017, 18. So you still like there were not as many like vendors out there to do what we were doing, right? And since we were in Poland and it was like their branch, it kind of like, for them, it was like, okay, like they're actually going with like a local vendor. That was just like,
So
came
that
to
was
us.
pre AI kind of era.
Yeah, yeah, for sure, for sure. Yeah, way before
Interesting.
AI.
Interesting. When we talked about regulations, you mentioned that European regulations a bit lagging behind the US in adoption. What do you think Europe still gets wrong about user experience in fintech, and what's is actually finally changing?
I think like when they're creating laws, like especially like for, laws that will be applied to like, software companies or like fintech companies, I don't think they really think as like a fintech innovator or a developer at all. They don't really like take us into account at all. Like, and you can see that from like what they require, because if you have like a vision of like, okay, I'm creating like this requirement for a trading application, right? So if you're going to like have like any trading products that connects like users to trading venues and equity markets, right? If you have like such a platform, then like you have to ask like this 25 questions to make sure that the user understands the kind of risk they're taking. That's a bit over the top. You don't need to ask like 25 questions. So they don't really like think about it like from like the journey that like those people like us, like who have to build the software or the app, right, have to create for the users, right? They don't understand like how difficult it is to acquire customers, acquire users.
Mhm.
They understand how much cost it has, like to acquire, to have someone to come to your app. They understand how much costs you have to like as an innovator, like an innovator usually wants the good of the users. They want like them to have access to like better markets, wider markets, like order, like make orders, like investments, like systematically, have like, a better sort of like financial education, understand markets better and execute in the market. At the end of the day, you're providing values, right? Because if you have to ask like repetitively, like, do you understand ETFs? What do you understand about ETFs? Like, how much is your experience on ETFs? And a lot of these questions are like, a lot of people just skip through.
Mhm.
I don't think they want to admit, but they do. That's the reality of it. They just skip through it. If you just kind of like, create like, a concentrated version, right? But then ask like more of like, I don't know, like a fun behavioral questions, because you're getting like a subjective answer anyway. Yeah, you're providing like objective options for the user to select from, but at the end of the day, like a lot of people are just like skipping through it. And if you ask them a question, they cannot answer the same question, so because they're just like, thinking like, what should I like answer right now to skip through this like question so I can see like what the app like gives me, right? So I think like they don't really understand that part, and they come like from this sort of like legacy mindset.
It sounds like it's a infinite loop in a way of struggle, because if you want to innovate, in most cases, the innovation would come from smaller innovators like startups. Startups, they have limited funding, usually very limited.
Yeah,
Rare cases when you have, runway long enough that you can experiment and do whatever you want. You're
yeah,
usually under very big pressure to get things done and start being cash positive as
yeah,
soon as possible. So you're doing the innovation, and suddenly you're facing the wall of acquisition because you have to follow the regulations. So then your innovation is killed. So it means that the only place where you can actually innovate is the old-fashioned, large institutions, well-funded, that have
mhm,
lots of resources. They can do that. So it sounds to me, it's like the regulations are written more for those large corporations that historically in any industry, doesn't matter whether it's financial services or manufacturing or you name it, those large corporations, they rarely bring innovation. They usually, because of their size and because of bureaucracy that we already discussed, they're usually very, very slow. So
yeah.
it sounds to me like that's an infinite problem that they like facing over and over again. But I'm wondering, so from your perspective, Are we talking about European challenge or US facing the same problems in your opinion?
No, I think like in US is a lot easier to go through like, like the questionnaire required to understand and assess like the risk profile of a user. It's a lot more straightforward. You have more room to innovate short charts, like understand the risk, like if you invest like this much, and if you lose like that amount, like are you comfortable with like, losing this amount because this is a potential risk of like the sort of like portfolio that has been selected for you. So it's a lot more interactive. It's like a set of guidelines that has been given to you, right? And then you kind of like can like implement it like in a way that you could have like some elements of innovation and creativity. You kind of like make the UI more interactive, whereas like in the EU, just basic questions.
So for me, it sounds like a sad reality for startups. If you want to survive with higher chances, your go-to-market has to be US, at least initially.
Yeah. I mean,
that's good insight.
Yeah, it's not possible for everybody to do that. So a lot of like, I think like fintech apps like in the EU, they're just like facing it, like they're just facing it. And the thing is like, once you start like providing like US markets, then you also have like, okay, you're like, because everybody wants to invest in like in the US markets, right? You have like the Max 7 that are just they're killing it, right? And everybody wants a share of that, right? A share of that success, right?
Yeah, so the competition is very, very tough.
Yeah, in the US, like the market is a lot more mature than like in the European countries. I think like there are like many reasons why they're like a lot more ahead than the European markets. I think the pension system is the most important one in my opinion, because like in the US, like you are in charge of your retirement, You just have to get in there, like create your Roth IRA, put money in it like from early days, and it's just like embedded into like the system, embedded into like the employment contracts. It's just embedded in the whole country, right? Whereas in the EU, like you have like a pension retirement system that is sovereign based, and you get something, like not a lot, but there's something, that you're getting paid for, so you won't be hungry, So that's why like people don't really think of like investments or trading like early on. That's changing for sure because life is a lot more expensive than it used to be. So a lot of people want to like have like ways to also like grow what they have, even though I think a lot of times like people don't really understand, like because they always like associate like investments with positive returns due to like the last like 10 years of like bull market that we have had. Everything just keeps on going up. Nobody experiences any losses, so everybody's just like going up, so that's it's just like almost like understood as like a secured profit, on your money. And I think people like really understand like markets can fall, and they do fall. Like that's inevitable. It's gonna happen, So I think a lot of people like in Europe have like problems like understanding that, because it's the new generation that is interested in investment and trading, and they haven't like experienced like a massive drawdown in a market yet, and it's going to happen. There's nobody can like teach you that. Just just have your portfolio diversify and be in it as long as you can. Like that's the game, right? Be in it as long as you can.
We're getting closer to the end of this conversation, and I really want to get your take into what's happening with AI and in the domain that you built products in. So AI models become more accessible, and we see AI implementation here and there in different shapes and forms, automation. How do you think it's reshaping the relationship between human advisors, algorithms, and clients?
When it comes to like financial advice, like that has been like the discussion before like the release of GPT, that like, okay, like there are computer models that could do as good of a job as like financial advisor can do, because you just implement like the construction, like portfolio construction logics they have, you just code it, it's intelligent. It's not artificial intelligence, but it's just intelligence. It understands like the ways of like your profile, So this has been the topic, for some time already. Like we had like Betterment and Wealthfront in the US, which are like robo-advisors, and they do what robo-advisors. So advisors are kind of like used to this. I think AI is actually a good thing for them because they can just process a lot better, a lot more, because like the customers that wanted to stick with the human advisors stuck with the human advisors because they had already a lot of options to like move to like a digital financial advisors already, before AI. So I think like it doesn't really like influence them as much yet. And I think when it comes to like having AI models to decide on behalf of retail clients, we just don't have like the regulatory framework for those. It needs to go through a lot of like testing phases, so you can have like, you can of course like build your own personal model, right? You build like something for yourself, DIY, I want like this AI model like to understand like the market for me, and then like I'll give it some logic, and then it would just invest on behalf of me, right? But you cannot have the discretionary done for retail clients as of now, So if you're like, launching something like digital, it has to be like, the logic has to be crystal clear for the regulators to audit, right? So you cannot just have like a black magic box, that which decides, and nobody can understand it or question it, So I don't think financial advisors are yet threatened by AI yet, but software
Because it's
developers are for
protected by
sure.
regulations.
Yeah, but software developers are for sure are, and I think like we just use a lot of like AI right now.
Right. Let's wrap it up. It's been quite a fascinating conversation. I really appreciate it. And before we finish, I'd like to get your take onto cultural aspects and mindset for teams to succeed in fintech and build long-term trustworthy products.
I think like there's no right or wrong answer to this, because there are like so many different ways that I have seen at least like people like build teams. The most is to build cross-disciplinary teams, and have them like interact with each other. Once you have like, I don't know, from the topics that we discussed, like a designers, with the developer, but the legal team, and like the business analysts, like working in a same sort of like environment. Nobody thinks like their job is the most important or their job is most difficult, because they kind of like interact with each other in a, in a very like detailed manner. And I think that just builds like empathy in the team. And I think that's important, that people think like they're on the same boat. So for me, like to kind of like have the team to think they're in the same boat is to have like those multidisciplinary team members and then working in a project. And for me, it's also accountability is very important. I cannot work with people who are not accountable for the task or for the work that they're doing. You have to be like in charge and get it done.
Are you guys remote, or you have office here in Portugal?
No, we have an office, but it's just me going to the office. But we're across like Europe right now.
Nice.
Yeah.
Hanif, thank you very much for your time. It's as I said before, it's been a great conversation. Really appreciate it. Learned quite a bit of things from this. Thank you.
Yep, it was a pleasure.
For the listeners, as usual, if you're watching this YouTube, don't forget to hit the like button, subscribe to the channel. If you are listening to this on any podcast platform, don't forget to subscribe and leave a comment. And see you in the next episodes. Bye-bye.